So for those of you who are joining tonight, we have got the Q&A box open and also the chat. We've also received lots and lots of questions on the run up to this. So we've got some key themes that we're going to talk through to try and cover as much as we can tonight. So yeah, we want it to be interactive. So do pop your comments and your questions in as we go through. I'm just going to give it another 20 seconds or so, then we'll get going because we've got a lot to fit into this hour. Right, let's get going. So, welcome to tonight's webinar, which is focused all around donor conceived voices. And this is a really, really important webinar. And I'm delighted to have Hayley and Freya, who are joining me, sharing their own lived experiences. I also want to say a huge thank you to Apricity for hosting this session and making it possible. And we have Debs from Apricity who has joined us tonight, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about what they do before we get started. So I'm going to hand over to you first, Debs, and then I'll introduce myself properly. But yeah, just to share a little bit more about what Apricity does. And yeah, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Becky. Hello, everyone. My name's Debs. I'm one of the senior fertility nurses at Apricity. I'm not sure if any slides are going to come up. They might be, yeah. So just to tell you a little bit more about what Apricity does and our donor support program. So Apricity are the UK's first virtual fertility clinic, and we're really proud to be able to offer a really great and successful egg donation program as well. So what that means is that we're able to match recipients with egg donors all across the UK. With wait times on average sort of 3 to 6 months, but often it's much quicker than that because we have access to donors all across the UK. So sometimes we're matching people within like a matter of days or hours, nearer to the weeks rather than the month waiting list. A little bit about our donors is that all our donors are UK based. So in line with the HFEA anonymity side of things, you're not able to find out who your donor is. However, the child has a right to know. So if your donation is successful and you're having a child, then the child is able to find out identifying information about their donor after the age of 18. As part of our matching process, we have extensive calls and talks with you to talk about the characteristics and criteria that you're looking for within your donor. You also get the opportunity to view a profile that your donor will write about themselves. So hobbies, interests, likes, dislikes, what makes a good day, what makes a bad day, just to help you get a real feel for who they are as a person. You also get 2 childhood photos of your donor. Obviously, it's usually of them as a baby or a toddler, so they're not identifying. The other aspect really of Apricity is that we offer 7-day support for you via our Apricity app. And what that means is that you get access to a fertility advisor and a fertility nurse or midwife who are there to answer your questions 7 days a week. So you've always got someone on hand to kind of ask any questions, get an update on what's going on as well. So yeah, there's a little bit more information on the Apricity app just on the slides there. In terms of how else we can help you, so obviously we've got the wonderful webinar this evening, but if you did have any other questions about Apricity, how we work, our matching service, we have online chat on our website, which I'll be trying to keep tabs of this evening throughout the webinar if needed, or you can always drop any questions to me in the Q&A. I also have some one-to-one consultation slots available tomorrow afternoon, and I'll put the link to book into those. They're free to book, half an hour slots that you can book into. So I'll put the booking link in the Q&A. But there's also via our website, there's just a general booking link where you can book in with either myself, my colleagues, Gajinda or Gemma also have slots available. So there's always someone who can take your call, not just tomorrow afternoon. But yeah, I'm really grateful to be here, and it's really nice to be able to partner with you guys, Becky, and I'm really looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Debs. And yeah, we do partner with Apricity as Paths to Parenthood. So just to introduce myself, firstly, I'm Becky Kearns. I have an account on Instagram and a blog called Defining Mum. So I'm also known as Defining Mum. I am the mum to three amazing girls, all thanks to egg donation. And I have been talking about my story for the past 5+ years, and actually really trying to open up conversations about this path to parenthood. And actually, whilst doing so, some of the most important stories that I have heard and important voices that I've listened to and learned from are those of the people who are donor conceived themselves. Because when we have a child through donor conception, we're really, really keen to make sure that our child has the best possible start, that they're supported, and who better to hear from those who are donor conceived themselves. So tonight's conversation is really, really important. I think there'll be people here who are listening who are right at the very beginning, maybe considering whether donor conception is for them. You might be going through treatment, you might be pregnant after donor conception, or you might be parenting. So I know we've got a range of people listening in, and you'll all be at different stages. And I think it's important to acknowledge that over the past few years, support has changed around donor conception. There is more conversation out there, there's more support available. And the hope is that with that support, we can make sure that donor conceived people and our children are really, really supported in how they came to be and how we get them comfortable and knowing more about their genetic origins. So just to tell you a little bit about Paths to Parenthood, Paths to Parenthood is a donor conception support platform, which I launched back in 2020. Hayley now joins me in the running of Paths to Parenthood, and it is a support platform for recipient parents through egg donation at whatever stage you're at, where you can hear professional voices talking about these different experiences, the emotions that we might have and experience. We hear about research into donor conception, and we also hear lived experiences. So parents, but also donor conceived people as well, and donors too. So it's a space where you can really, really get to explore this path to parenthood. And we're really delighted because we partner with Apricity. And when you use Apricity on your donor conception journey, you get 6 months access to Paths to Parenthood. So it's a great way for you to be able to really explore what this path means whilst you're going through the practical side of treatment. So I want to introduce my two guests tonight. I'm going to hand over to them just to give a very, very brief overview of their own story as a donor conceived person. I think both Hayley and Freya are also recipient parents through donor conception. So we have a really unique set of perspectives with us tonight. So Hayley, I'm going to come to you first, just to introduce yourself and your story.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome to everyone watching this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world. So, like I said, I'm Hayley. I'm an adult donor conceived person. I'm DCP Journey to RP. Some of you may have come across me on Instagram, and I'm also the founder of All Things Donor Conception, which is an information sharing website for all members of our donor conception community. But I suppose my story starts very early 80s, and my parents had early IVF, pioneering IVF treatment. And it was a celebrated story growing up that I was a test tube baby. But sadly, I found out late in life that actually as part of that really early IVF treatment, due to my dad's infertility, they'd used an anonymous sperm donor as part of that treatment. So I found out really late in life, in my early 30s, about that situation. I actually then, I'm actually in a gay relationship, so my wife and I went on to have donor conceived twins who are nearly 7 now. My wife carried, did the hard work, and we also used her eggs, but also obviously we used a sperm donor to have that treatment. So Freya as well, it's not the most unusual in that sense because we're both donor conceived people and recipient parents. But I suppose I got into this world a little bit by talking about my story and talking about some of the journey that I've gone on through DNA testing, but also how what I've learned through my lived experiences, hopefully helping me shape how we kind of talk to our own donor conceived children and obviously helping others. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, really. So.
Thank you, Hayley. And I have, as a parent, learned so much just through listening to you. And Freya, I know, Freya, you've been involved in a number of events that I've hosted. And I think not only have I learned a lot about how I can support my children, I've also got a lot of comfort as well, I think, from hearing your stories. And we'll get into that in a bit more depth soon. But Freya, just coming to you, just can you give us a bit of an overview of your own story?
Yeah, I'm Freya. So I am a donor conceived adult like Hayley. I speak a bit on Unicorn DCP on Instagram. I've done a little bit of work previously with Hayley and with Becky before. So my parents are 2 women, gay parents, and they they decided they wanted kids in the 90s. So they went through a clinic. Well, my mum went through as a single parent because that's how it works then. And they used an anonymous sperm donor. Successfully conceived me and my sister 4 years later. We have always known that we're donor conceived. We've always known it was an anonymous donor. And as we got older and I turned 18, we were able to apply for certain things like finding half siblings. So I've been on a journey to find a lot of half siblings and my donor. And then in 2020, I had my first daughter with my wife. And so our daughter is donor conceived as well with a sperm donor. And we used an open ID donor through a clinic. And 2 years later, we had our second daughter with the same donor. And I carried both with my eggs. So my wife is the non-biological parent. So I came to it when I was pregnant with my eldest. I sort of had never really looked into the world of donor conception before because it had just been my story. I guess it had been fairly normal to me. And then I wanted to find more of a community for my children. And I came across people like Hayley, who were also dual citizens like me, and felt that community, and we could talk about things that I had not really previously been able to talk about before. So, yeah.
Thank you, Freya. And I think you can see already there's this like contrast in stories in terms of how you were told. And I think that's the first kind of topic that came through in the questions that I really want to explore with you. Because often there's the questions around, okay, how do we talk to our children about this? And what words do I use? And obviously, Freya, you were told from a very early age. Can you just talk us through kind of how that conversation went for you and how you felt actually knowing right from the start that you were donor conceived?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those conversations that is not a memorable conversation because it was so early on that I have no memory of sitting down and doing that. So it was just always known, and it was so casual that my parents would bring it up occasionally. I'd bring it up occasionally, but it wasn't really a sort of big thing, and I was quite proud of the fact. So when I did then sort of go to school and mix with other kids, and they would ask the inevitable sort of, "Where's your dad?" because they'd see my two moms or whatever. I was so chill about it because it was so normal for me. And I still love educating people on it. And I sort of joked I'd give little seminars when I was at high school to all the kids that had no clue what having a sort of donor dad was, as they like to call it. So yeah, I was really proud of it, still am. And it was a topic I love talking about from a really young age.
Yeah, and actually, one of the questions we had through was around, did you tell other friends, and was it something that you had negative experiences around? Did you have have any negative comments or anything when you
I
were
mean,
so
I
open
think I had
about
the
it?
kind of basic ones of people going, "Oh, where's your dad?" or sort of it, but it was more out of not a lack of understanding, really. Rarely was it malicious. And then that was just my cue to go, "Oh, well, I will explain to you how this works," because
So,
my parents had made me so
yeah.
confident. I was quite happy to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are kind of certain kind of situations, whether in gay families or within solo parents, where the kind of the donor link is probably more obvious, and there might be more questions. Whereas kind of a heterosexual family like my own, that may not even come up for the girls in those conversations. But I think for me, it's given them the confidence to be able to talk about it and be able to share. So I think that's really reassuring to hear that being told from that early age, it was just normalized for you. It was something that you've always known, and there was never that shock moment. Whereas, Hayley, I know for you, it was in your 30s. And do you wish you'd have known earlier? And how has that influenced how you support your own children?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said I've never had a problem being donor conceived at all, but what I have had problem with is not being told about it younger. Obviously, very different story to Freya's, and that mine was a big shock event in my life, to the point it's almost like a before and after kind of moment for me. And sadly, it came out in like I say, in a family argument as well, just to kind of add sort of more complexities to the situation. So yeah, I would just say that obviously the difference was quite stark there. But my parents were raising me in an era where donor conception wasn't really discussed. There was no support platforms like we obviously have on the Hub and things like that, and there was no storybooks. And parents were pretty much told not to tell their children the truth. So yeah, it was a very different story, but quite a dramatic one, obviously, when I did find out. So
Yeah. And how has that influenced then how you talk to your own children, Hayley, and how have you approached that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been the huge motivating factor to make sure that we've integrated their story from as early as possible. So yeah, I suppose like the complete opposite really to maybe how my parents did things. Again, not to kind of cast blame on them because they were, raising me in a very different era. But for me, it was really important, and for my wife too, because my wife kind of went through that shock discovery alongside me, that actually we really need to not just talk about their story, our children's conception story to them, but almost be really proactive in those discussions. Not to say that those discussions aren't easy, because that they can be really challenging with my parent hat on now, but those lived experience, I think, and what I actually went through as a late discovery donor conceived person is really shown me how important it is to have those conversations when a child is young.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot in Paths to Parenthood. We provide lots of resources and support, and actually the theme for next month is all about talking to your child and how you can do that depending on whatever family setup you have. But let's move on to, because another question that came through is the relationship with your parents. And obviously, Hayley, for you, had that moment of kind of where you suddenly found out that what you thought was the case wasn't. And how did that impact your relationship? And just tell us a little bit more about your relationship with your dad, who is your non-genetic parent, but your dad nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I had the news, it didn't change who my dad was to me. He was my dad. He's still the person that I'd ring in a crisis. I'm in my 40s now, and he's in his, nearly late 70s, and I would still ring him in a crisis. But I think what the problem with the late discovery element was that it did at the time bring up lots of emotions for me. I was very angry at the start. I'm very I kind of felt like obviously I had this really important information about my identity kept from me. But actually, this was 10 years ago now. So we've done a lot of work as a family around, since the disclosure. And actually, especially with my dad, I feel like I've got an even stronger relationship, which I didn't think was possible. And actually, it's made me respect him in so many more ways. I think knowing that he's raised me he's the most wonderful dad you could ever imagine. I feel incredibly fortunate that the world collided and the universe collided, and I got to have him as my dad. But I think, like I say, it's the shock element did cause a lot of disruption at the time, but like I say, we've done a lot of work together as a family, and as a result of that, we've actually become stronger, I think. So
yeah, and that's amazing to hear, and about your relationship. And I know will be reassuring for people. And actually, kind of, I think the lesson from that is around that the story doesn't have to be hidden. It's something that you can talk about and be proud of, like within your family, Freya. And Freya, do you mind just sharing with us your relationship with your parents and also your non-genetic parent as well?
Yeah, I mean, so my parents split when I was quite small, and my non-biological mum sort of moved slightly further away, but still, the same as Hayley, she's been my best friend since birth. Basically, we've had a really close bond. And my biological mum passed away 7-8 years ago. And my non-biological mum I call Nikki. She is just my rock, and same as Hayley, I ring her for everything, and I ring her sometimes 3 times a day because I don't know how to work the washing machine. Like, she's my go-to. And the fact that we don't share any genetics has never fazed me once. I was closer to her growing up than I actually was to my biological mum. We butted heads a lot. We were very, very similar. So having that person to go to, that was, that she's my best friend. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're going to move on to talk about now is your parent's donor, genetic parent, biological father, whatever terminology we use, and we could do a whole other webinar on terminology. We actually have a podcast, haven't we, episode. If anyone wants to kind of hear us talk about terminology, there's a Paths to Parenthood podcast episode. But I think one of the things for me as a potential recipient parent, when I was first considering going down the donor conception route, there were a lot of fears. And I think one of the fears was around that person being almost a replacement for me, and they were able to do the thing that I wasn't able to do in terms of giving my genetics. And I think there was always this fear that one day I might be replaced. One day they might want to find her, and in doing so, that means that they think less of me, and all of these different fears I had at the very beginning. And now I'm in the role as mom, and I'm there with them day to day. I know that what we have cannot absolutely be replaced. And I think the way I see it now is that the donor is an addition rather than anything that's going to take anything away from me. And I think one of the key things I've really learned as I've listened to donor conceived people over the past few years is the real commonality in curiosity. And actually, that curiosity doesn't mean a reflection on your relationship with your parents who are raising you, but actually, it is common to be curious about your genetic origins and want to find out more. And I'd love to hear from both of you in terms of how that has played out for you. I don't know, Freya, whether you're happy to share first, and kind of you've always known, and kind of what stage did you become curious, and how have you followed that through?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of growing up, because I knew from a young age that he was anonymous, and it really was completely anonymous in the 90s. That wasn't, we weren't told when you turn 18 you can get this information. It was you will never know him. I think I kind of just didn't, I put it maybe to the back of my head. I didn't have a burning desire to know who he was. I was more interested in siblings, but donor wise, I was not that fussed. I think when I got slightly older, sort of maybe late teens, I started to think a lot about the things that were coming up in me, like my interests, and they weren't the same as my parents. I couldn't see that reflected in them. So I wondered a lot, kind of, oh, did I maybe get this from my biological father, my donor? I called him my donor growing up. So it was often just kind of going, I wonder if that's shared. And then I thought a lot more about it when I started thinking about having my own kids, because then it was going, I want to be able to give them more information, and I didn't have a lot. So that curiosity mainly came from maybe wanting to fill in a few gaps, I guess. And it wasn't anything kind of sort of burning desire. It was just a kind of niggling kind of, oh, I wonder where that's from type thing.
Yeah. And I think just thinking about kind of answering questions and filling in gaps for your children, that's one of the things, because we used a completely anonymous donor from the Czech Republic, and I have very, very little information about her. And that's where kind of I've really, really been an advocate for organizations like Apricity, where you can get a lot more information about that person. You can paint a bit of a picture about them and maybe fill in some gaps. And obviously they have the choice at the kind of age of 18 to find out who that person is. I think from your perspective, Hayley, obviously it was later on in life you had the shock, and then did that curiosity hit you instantly, or how did that work for you?
To be honest, I wasn't that curious at the start when I found out, and I do think because of the shock element, I just kind of I did just push the whole information to one side for a period of time. I wasn't that and a bit similar to Freya in that respect. My parents had used a fully anonymous donor. I was also born quite a bit before Freya, so there was literally no records whatsoever. So when Freya was born, there was some information that you could apply for in the UK, whereas I was born way pre-1991, before the HFEA was even established. So to be honest, I just didn't even think that there would be any info out there. I didn't really know anybody that was donor conceived. Ended up Googling donor conception, back when I first found out. And yeah, I just kind of pushed it to the back of my mind. And interestingly, it was only when my wife and I started to think about starting a family. Obviously, we then chose a sperm donor, an open ID donor, and that was really important to us to have that identifying information should our children want it. But it was only then, really, when they were about 2 years old, that I actually became curious about my genetic heritage. And I think it was more because we had started to then talk to our children about their story, which then got me thinking a bit more about my situation. So I would say that actually it took, maybe a good few years actually before I became curious, even after sort of finding out kind of in that shock discovery.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, the kind of that curiosity wasn't to replace anyone, was it? And
No.
tell me about actually because you have found your parents' donor, or your genetic father or biological father.
We'll call him lots of different things.
How did that go?
Yeah, well, I call him Jonathan. His name's Jonathan, and that's just
yes.
so much easier because we can get really
and that's
jumbled
the day to day.
Yes, I
way
don't.
of
Yeah, exactly.
referring to him.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like I say, we won't go down too much the rabbit hole of terminology because it's very personal. I think that's probably one thing you'll find if you speak to lots of different donor conceived people. People refer to them different, the donor as lots of different things. But yeah, it was only I actually sent my DNA kit off. And was able through genealogy to locate him. And again, it was purely just more because I just wanted to have a photograph. I just wondered what he was like, didn't have any real information on him. And I think it was also part of me a little bit was, like I say, very curious about our own children moving forward. And if they had questions about the donor that obviously we'd used, I wanted them to sort of almost know that it's okay to be curious, because like mummy was too. That's fine. It's okay to ask questions because I was curious as well. So yeah, that kind of inspired me there. But to be honest, finding Jonathan is, like I say, has satisfied a lot of my curiosity. I've been able to meet him and several of my half siblings also through commercial DNA testing that are donor conceived. And it's just been it's been an enriching experience. Actually, it hasn't replaced anything to do with my mum and dad and the family that I've been raised with. It's almost just been as an addition, really. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah. And how about you, Freya? I know you've had several meetups with your biological father as well.
Yeah. I mean, I had one meetup. I think it was the second time that I met Alex. We'll call him Alex, it's easier. And I invited him over to ours, and Nikki was visiting at the same time. And it was the idea that she could maybe take my eldest child off for lunch so that me and Alex could have a chat. But also I did say, I was like, I would love you two to meet, and it's okay to be like, absolutely not. But she was like, I've been curious about him from the moment you were born. Like I'm desperate to know him too. And so they came in and had a coffee together, and seeing them sat there and then her looking at us sat there was just the most surreal experience. But yeah, I think it was I wanted her to share that with me, because she's always told me, she was like, the moment you were born, I looked at you and I just went, I want to know where you came from. It was like her biggest sort of regret that she couldn't give me that growing up. So I loved that she had been able to see that and hear. She loves hearing the stories of the meetups and stuff like that, and seeing pictures, and yeah, she loves it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like that was really important for you to have that support from her in your curiosity as well and finding out. And I know, Hayley, your situation was slightly different because of the way in which you found out, but kind of how did that feel with your parents, or what would have really helped you during that time in terms of what could a parent do to encourage that curiosity and support it?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was always going to be very difficult, I think, because of the shame. And you got to think my parents hadn't discussed this either for over 30 years. And they basically were going to take this to the graves, essentially. So it was very difficult in that sense. But I was very mindful, obviously, reaching out to genetic relatives and commercially DNA testing, because I didn't want to upset my parents. I didn't want my dad, especially, to feel like I was searching for some replacement father or dad or anything like that. So I was very mindful. I discussed everything with my parents just to kind of break that cycle. I was very, even though it was quite difficult to do, I've been very open and honest with them. But one of the things, I suppose, my dad has been very supportive. I've no doubt it's probably has been challenging for him to know that I've been able to locate Jonathan. But I hope actually through some of the conversations that we've had together, he knows that the situation, my relationship with my dad hasn't changed at all. If anything, it's improved. So hopefully, even if maybe my dad was a little bit apprehensive at first, I'd like to think hopefully that he's kind of realized that it hasn't changed anything between us just because I've been able to locate who Jonathan is. So
yeah. And actually, in meeting Jonathan and Alex, has that filled in some gaps for you in terms of what you were kind of maybe not missing, but kind of wondering around where certain traits came from? I don't know, Hayley, for you, I know there's been some similarities between yourself and Jonathan.
Yeah, only just I've got a really pointy nose. If you see if I go to the side, and Jonathan has exactly the same nose, and just things like that. Like both love gin and tonic. I don't know if that's just the similarity. I'll blame him on that. But no, just
most people do.
Yeah, just like just kind of physical features, our interests. I suppose we've got lots of differences too. I mean, there's so many differences as well. And so it's just more just like, I think just that human curiosity, really. It's been quite interesting to find out. But, you know, I think it's important to say that, you know, myself and Freya will talk about what we felt, but there's lots of donor conceived people that aren't particularly curious, aren't particularly interested, and may never seek out the identity of the donor. And I think that's important to acknowledge too. You know, it's it can vary, and people's feelings around that curiosity can change, I think, over a lifespan. You know, we're talking maybe about a lot of the people here will have very young children, or don't even have children yet. And that situation may change, you know, through, like I say, through the years. So.
Yeah, I think that's been a really important learning for me, that actually there is a real spectrum of responses to being donor conceived, but also the feelings can change over time. And I've learned that even myself as a recipient parent, that my feelings and fears and things like that have really shifted. And Freya, what about you when you met Alex? Did you find that answered some questions for you?
Yeah, I think it was just like you say, having a photograph. That was all I'd really wanted for a long time. I'd never really been able to picture him. I don't know whether I wasn't really letting myself, because I thought, well, I'm never going to be able to go, oh yes, that is him, so there's no point having a picture. But it meant when I did have one, I was like, yeah, not what I expected at all. He had more hair in my head than he does now. But in reality, yeah, it's just being able to go, great, I know what he is and who he is. But actually the bonus was that we get on really well, and we have this really lovely natural relationship that I did not expect at all. So we can talk on the phone for hours. It's never been awkward when we meet up. And we have a lot in common. We can talk about like true crime and stuff like that for hours. My mom hated that stuff. So it's been lovely to go, we have these kind of interests, but also he is very similar to my mum, and that was a lovely thing to find, because I thought actually my mum would have been so pleased that she'd had him as a donor that she'd not had really any choice in. She was just given him as a donor. But they're so similar, and that's been lovely. Actually, it's been having almost a little piece of her back. And he knows that, and he is aware of how much that means to me, so that's lovely. But also, going off Hayley said, my sister has no interest in knowing about the donor. We've been raised exactly the same parents, same donor. She has no interest at all. And I can't really see that changing anytime soon, so we haven't really been on this journey together when I thought that we probably would be. So
that's really interesting, given that she could probably find out quite easily because you know him. So
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make around, actually everybody's different, and I think that's what we've got to really listen and support our children in how they feel, and maybe not expect them to feel a certain way, because they are all individuals as well. And the next theme I sort of want to move on to is around fears, and actually one of the biggest fear being that being donor conceived might impact our children in some way, shape, or form. And I think parents are often keen to hear from donor conceived people and hear that they're okay and that they're doing okay and it's not negatively impacted. And obviously there's a real mix of complexities. And actually one of the questions that has just come in live kind of picks up on this. And the question is, do you think being donor conceived has negatively affected you in any way or disadvantaged you? I'd like to maybe come to you first, Bray. Obviously, you've known all along. Do you feel in any way, shape, or form that it has negatively affected you?
No, not in the slightest. I think which has then affected the fact that I've used a donor to have my kids. Like there was no part of me that felt that was in any way something that was a disadvantage growing up. I had two parents that loved me, and I have two parents that love, that was something I was never searching. As I said, that was never something I was massively missing out on. When I was curious, my parents were happy to talk through that with me. So I was embraced in the idea of curiosity, like I wasn't pushed away from that. So no, there was no part of that was a disadvantage. I love it about myself. I will talk to strangers about it. Like I'm so open about it, because I think it isn't talked about. Like Hayley was saying, it's been taboo for a really long time. So I think it's great to be able to talk loud and proud about it. So yeah.
Thank you. And Hayley, just coming to you, obviously you've worked a lot within the donor conceived community and you've spoken to lots of different people. What's your view around the whole kind of feeling that there's going to be an automatic negative kind of implication for our children? Obviously there are implications, but try to almost think of it myself as it doesn't have to be a negative. There are lots of things that we can do to support them. But what are your views around that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, also, I think there's a lot more research now, recently, certainly in the last few years, into the kind of long-term impact of donor conception on donor conceived families and on donor conceived people. And I think the overarching feeling is quite positive. A lot of the research shows, certainly, if we are telling our children from a younger age, under the age of 7, specific piece of research has been done into that to show that there are more positive outcomes for families. I think we're kind of still learning. I think it's still, even though, donor conception has been around for many, many decades, it's not really been looked at under a microscope. But I think, there's more and more people talking now about their lived experiences. Freya and I have done a lot of talking, but there's lots of people online now talking about their experiences and maybe things that have been done well and things that maybe we can learn from. But for me personally, very similar to Freya, I've gone down the donor conception route with myself to have a family. So at no point, would I've, thought that wouldn't have done that if I thought I was going to inherently cause some kind of harm or trauma to my children. But I do really feel that it's important for us as parents now, with my parent hat on, just to kind of prepare for sort of some of the conversations that we might have, some of the questions that might come from our children and from others, just to make sure that we're kind of best supported in order to support our kids. And I think that's where, thankfully things are changing, because like years ago, like my parents didn't have that support, sadly.
No.
So.
Yeah, and I think a lot has changed over the last few years. Like you say, there's more conversations around this. There's more support for parents. They're not just being told not to say anything and just being left. We've got these conversations happening, and organisations like Apricity are providing this extra support to help you on that. It's not just helping you to have a baby. It's then, okay, what do we do next, and how do we best support ourselves so that we can best support our children as well? There is a question that's come in around what made you choose a donor instead of adoption? And this person is considering with her husband, and they've got differing views. She would like to go down the donor route. He would like to maybe think about adoption if they can't use her eggs. And I mean, these are really individual decisions. And I think most people, when they're going through this, will consider all of the different options available. But what was it about donor conception that made you take that step? I don't know, Freya, is that something that you ever really considered doing anything different, or was that quite an easy decision for you?
I mean, I knew from a young age I would want to be pregnant. So I think that in terms of that, I knew that donor conception, I knew from a teenager that would be a part of my sort of journey, I guess. We would have some conversations, me and my wife, because there was the idea of, do we both want to be biologically related? So do we want to take it in turns? Do we want to do reciprocal IVF? And in the end, I think my wife said, I see your relationship with Nikki. I see how close you are. Like, there's no need for that, for genetics to play a part in that. And she stopped worrying about the sort of need to play that role. So we didn't go down the reciprocal IVF route. We went sort of, it was my eggs for both of them. And I think, I mean, adoption is very different, I guess. But for me, that it just kind of made logical sense to go down that. Especially I'd seen it work for my parents, and I'd seen, and it felt like a natural step, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, Hayley, you've said similar, that the relationship with your dad almost gave you that comfort as a non-genetic parent. So
I mean, it didn't, I mean, for me, it didn't matter to use my eggs, so I never really felt like I wanted to carry a pregnancy either. So I was quite fortunate in the fact I married a woman in that sense, because my wife could do that for me. So she, but Jez always wanted to be pregnant. So that's kind of why we made those decisions. But for me, genetics wasn't, like I say, it wasn't something that I thought that I would need in order to love a child, because I kind of had that experience with my dad and knew that it wouldn't matter for me. And like I say, even though I suppose going into parenting as the non-genetic parent, I didn't have my kind of worries, and I still do sometimes, those little niggles that can kind of come in with our kids. But ultimately, like I say, I can always look back on the relationship I've got with my dad and know that, it doesn't really matter at all. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it is really difficult when you're making these decisions, because you're kind of taking a leap of faith into the unknown. And particularly if you're in a heterosexual relationship, it might not have been the way you've always imagined your have your children. And for me, from my own experience, it was a real grieving process of the loss of my genetics and what did that mean. But also my partner, my husband, was grieving as well, because it's not the way he thought that would happen. And so I think communication is really, really key when you're going through this. There's been another question around how do you propose approaching different views to donor conception with your partner? And it can cause conflict, and it absolutely does. And that's actually been the theme on Paths to Parenthood this month. We've had lots of conversations with professionals and psychologists talking about, as a couple, how you can have these conversations. So I would signpost you to that. There's lots of information in there, and webinars and things like this that you can kind of sit and watch together, because it's about dipping your toe in, and it's about exploring, and about maybe pushing yourself a bit further to find out more about something you might be a bit scared about, but then reflecting and thinking, right, is this right for me, and what does this mean for us and our family, because everyone will be different. Just moving on to another question we had kind of beforehand, kind of relating to a fear, a very common fear. I'll come to you first, Freya. Like, do you see who do you see as your real parents? Because this word real gets banded around a lot. What would you say in terms of that? Because I think there's often a fear when we use a donor with a non-genetic parent that we won't feel like or be seen as, or seen as the legitimate real parent. What's your view around that?
My moms are absolutely my parents. I think as much as it's a bonus to know who Alex is and to know him as a person, I don't see him in my head or refer to him as being my parent. Biological parent, if I'm trying to explain the relationship, sure, because that's who he is. He gave me half of my DNA. He's biologically related to me, but he didn't do any of the hard stuff growing up, and he didn't deal with me as a teenager or anything like that. So in that sense, he's never parented me. He just is a biological parent. And it's knowing him never changed how I then viewed Nikki ever. And knowing she wasn't related to me growing up biologically never changed how I viewed her either. I never had the kind of "you're not my real mum" arguments as such. So that never happened.
Yeah. I think these fears can be really big in our minds, but then it's hearing people's realities can really help. And Hayley, what about you? Obviously, real can mean many different things. But yeah, how has that played out for you?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective as a donor conceived person, if you say it, my dad is my real parent, but it's very similar to Freya, you know, when I'm trying to explain the situation, because you imagine sometimes you are in situations where it's quite hard to explain if people aren't familiar with donor conception, and I'm maybe referring to something to do, but maybe even like the work I do, I suppose. I will say about Jonathan, and I will maybe refer to him as my genetic father, biological father, not because I'm particularly attached to that word, but I think most people know what that is, whereas some people actually don't know what a donor is, for example, and things like that. But I think actually, when it comes to the term real as well, I think actually it means sometimes it's a bit more impressionable to me as a parent, because certainly in a two-mum family, we've had it before where someone will say to Jez, my wife, and I, also, which one's the real mum? So we've actually had that before. So actually that's quite, it's more of an impactful phrase, I suppose, for me in my parenting role, more so than my donor conceived person role. It doesn't even really factor as a donor conceived person for me, because it's quite clear cut.
Yeah, it's a really interesting term, isn't it? I know we've done webinars on the term real before, and I just wanted to share there was actually something that happened the other night when one of my daughters had a nightmare, and I got in bed with her, and I was trying to almost bring her out of the dream. There was some naughty eel or something that had done something that had scared her. And I was trying to say, look, that's not real. This is real. Mummy giving you a kiss is real. Mummy giving you a cuddle is real. And then she went, you're real. You're my mummy. And I just had this moment where it just brought it all back to all those fears I had about not feeling like the real parent. That is what's real, what's happening right in front of you. It's that act of parenting, isn't it? And so I just kind of, as we were talking about this, I just thought I'd share that because that was very recent, and it was just one of those moments where it really, really came home to me that this is real. And yeah, those fears were real, but they didn't come to fruition. I'm really conscious of time because I've got lots of questions coming in. One other topic that I really wanted to cover, and I think is important, and one that we probably don't think about as much early on, is the topic of siblings. And obviously, I know, Freya, you said you were interested in finding out about siblings, and yourself as well, Hayley. What are your thoughts around that? How has has this kind of impacted your own family choices? I know obviously with your children, they'll potentially have half siblings, and what would you advise parents to be thinking about when it comes to siblings? I know Hayley, you've talked quite a lot about siblings, and it can be slightly different between egg donation and sperm donation in terms of numbers, but still it is a consideration.
Yeah, I think, and I think one of the questions was at what age to kind of mention it to your children. I mean, I think having worked with, we've done a lot of work, haven't we, with Dr. Avi Perlman, who does a lot of
Yeah.
talks with us on the hub, specifically about talking to our children at certain ages and what they can understand. And like I say, I've spoken to lots of different professionals in this area, and they always say that it's probably helpful to bring up the concept of siblings as young as possible. You don't necessarily need to know, for 100% that there are siblings out there, for example, because some people might not know. Some people might know certain information. For example, you can request certain non-identifying information under the age of 18 of siblings if you conceived your child at a HFEA clinic. So you might have, say, the number of siblings, but you don't know who they are. So I think it's helpful to kind of just introduce the concept that there might be siblings. So going back to this thing that you're not going to have a shock kind of chat when your child's maybe a teenager, for example. But yeah, for me personally, I've been able to locate my own donor siblings through commercial DNA testing. And it's been it's been great to get to know them, but also quite difficult in some ways because we're all kind of adults with our own baggage, I suppose. So my wife and I have made the decision we've been able to connect with a number of our children's donor siblings. And we've been in contact with them for a period of time now, and we've actually met some of those families, and it's been a really positive experience, actually. And again, going back to kind of this enriching word, it's just sort of added to our kind of family dynamic, really. So,
Yeah. And what about yourself, Freya?
I mean, I've got 15 half siblings in my sibling set. So different to Hayley, I had the numbers of how many I had growing up. Well, at 16, I got those numbers. And then I applied to the HFEA, to the donor sibling link, to hopefully meet them all. And then I didn't meet any for ages. And I've met 5. But it's been such a slog to find them, and it's not happened quickly. And it's come in dribs and drabs. And every time it's happened, it's been this huge upheaval of feelings and emotions that I've never expected. And if you'd asked me before having my daughter about siblings, I would have said, yeah, she can meet them at 18. That's great. Like, that's how I've done it. And then as I had her and I went, I don't want her doing this as an adult. It's so hard. Like you say, you're bringing your adult baggage. It's every time I'm meeting someone new, I'm like, what are they going to be like? They've had an entire lifetime of not, I don't know them, and now we've got to meet, and we somehow are related, and we're meant to like each other, and it's weird. So similarly to Hayley, we've started actively looking for half siblings of our daughters, and we found one so far that we've connected with, which has been lovely. We haven't met yet, but it's been laying that kind of framework. But I found it harder than I thought I would, talking to my daughters. We've not yet raised to them the fact that they have half siblings, because I've not known how to word it to a 3-year-old. Like, I genuinely thought I would be fine with all of this, because I was like, yeah, this has been my life, my whole life. And suddenly when it comes to the wording, I'm like, oh, I don't actually know how to do this without confusing the hell out of a 3-year-old. And so I've just been taking it really slow and going to books, and my 3-year-old knows more about the word sperm than I think most 3-year-olds maybe do. But she's I'm slowly getting her into that of like, this is how a baby is made, and this is how with IVF and stuff. And she loves the picture books that we have that are sort of age appropriate. And I'm getting myself ready to do those conversations, I guess. But I didn't want doing it as an adult. As much as I could help that, as much as I could get it done before for them, I would love to make that easier for them. Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem. There isn't really a script for this, is there? And we're kind of all finding our own way. And I think one of the things that we're working on with Paths to Parenthood, and I know Hayley, you've put a lot of work into, is a course to support finding siblings. So not just the practical element of finding them, but building relationships and things to be aware of. Because sometimes you might find siblings. I know in adult life as well, you've found people, Hayley, who haven't known they were donor conceived up until the point that they've matched with you on a DNA test. So there's lots of complexities there. And I suppose the hope is that the more open we are in this next generation, that there won't be those shocks, and actually some of these relationships can be started earlier. But like you said, Freya, that I talk very openly with my girls. I don't know, because of the type of donor we use, whether or not there are any half siblings. She didn't have any children at the point of donating. She hadn't donated before at that clinic, but she might have done elsewhere. And so I've really struggled with how to kind of plant that seed that there might be others out there who are kind of half siblings. So it isn't easy. And that's the sort of things that the complexities that we need to consider. And that's hopefully what we're trying to support with over on Paths to Parent Hub. Now, conscious we've got 10 minutes left and we've got quite a few questions that have come through. So I'm going to try a little bit of quick fire if we can. So as being donor conceived, do you ever feel like something was missing or alone or different from how your cousins or friends were brought up? You're shaking your head, Freya. No,
No.
no. And I suppose, Hayley, you didn't know at the time
I didn't
when you were being
know,
brought
no.
up. So
But
no,
finding out I was donor conceived put some dots together. That's what I would say. So there were certain things I'm like, that makes sense now. So that was probably the only thing that I kind of acknowledge.
Yeah. Someone's asked a very niche question, but for some reason is playing on my mind. It's something, it's the small things that can be consuming. My daughter will start primary school soon, and I'm thinking about the family tree exercise. How do you approach this? Do you include the donor? And yeah, I think it is when they start school. You obviously, there's another caregiver, there's someone else who's going to be looking after them. And we've spoken on Paths to Parent Hub about our own experiences of having that conversation with teachers. And actually, they're really receptive and really open and really understanding. And I think people are more open to these things than you realize. But I think for me, it's always important that their caregiver is aware in case they ever bring it up, so they can be encouraging and they can empower them to talk about it rather than looking at them with a blank face. But I do think schools are very mindful of family tree exercises. I've not come across it so far with my daughters, and
I
my
had
eldest is
it.
in year 3.
Yeah,
Did
we had,
you?
yeah, when they were 4. Yeah, that was one of their first projects. It was quite well worded. It was like within your family, but it did talk about heritage, and making reference to heritage. But we kind of addressed it by this point, our children, we talked to them about their story, and they knew that they did have siblings, because we we were in the process of connecting with them. And the way we handled it was just to say, the family within our home, family that don't live with us, and is there any other people that are important that helped to make you? So we kind of addressed it that way. But again, it was quite interesting. So I think they were just under 5, at 4 or 5 then. But my daughter wanted to put just one of her siblings on one of her leaves. That was it. My little boy didn't at all. He was more interested in putting the pet fish on there, on one of the leaves. So it was quite interesting. And we just kind of let them, but I think that it can be quite stress inducing for us as parents, these topics. But actually the kids, they don't really care. They don't really think that much about it, I think. And maybe if you are worried about it, maybe have a little chat, like Becky said, with the teacher, just to kind of express your concerns. But I wouldn't worry too much about what your children are going to think at that young age, because they like I say, they're more interested in where the pets are going to go, I think. So
yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah.
Another question we've had, someone said, I wouldn't be ashamed to use a donor, but I'm a really private person and always have been. I worry about the child telling people, as obviously when they are little, they don't understand privacy as such and don't want to tell them not to tell anyone, as we don't want them to think they should be ashamed, if that makes sense. Yes, it does. But I also don't want them to go around telling people any advice. And it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because everybody's different. And obviously I share on quite a wide scale in terms of what we went through, and not everyone needs to do that. And I think there is a line between privacy and secrecy. I think when it comes to children, it's very difficult to control who they tell. But to be honest, I don't think our girls have really gone out there shouting about it, because they're much more interested in other things. So I think sometimes our fears might make us think that this might happen more so. But yeah, I don't know whether, Freya, what would you say around that? Because obviously you were told when you were young, and you did talk about it. And
yeah, I didn't tend to talk about it not prompted, I'd say. So
yeah.
and obviously with a 2-month family, that is prompted more. And to be fair, we taught our 3-year-old recently the word donor, and we've been talking about it, and she's not gone around, she talks about everything, but she's not actually gone and told anyone that explicitly. Though she did think it was donut for quite a while, and that
we've a donut, lady donut.
But no, I for me, I guess I would prepare a little bit of a script in your head, so that if it did happen spur of the moment, that's my gut reaction of just having something ready, even if it's a bit of a diversion. to talk about something else, but knowing that kids talk about everything. But
yeah, thank you. I'm going to come to another quick question. Hayley, what are your opinions on commercial DNA testing of children to find siblings?
Oh, that's a biggie. I don't think I can answer that in 30 seconds, to be honest. There's been lots of research recently done into the long-term implications of commercial DNA testing on lots of different ages. I think we don't know enough about it at the moment. I think that's what I would say. But I do, for me personally, we've made the decision. I suppose the best way to answer it is my wife and I have made the decision not to DNA test our children under the age of 18 at the moment. That's not to say that when our children get a bit older and they maybe have some autonomy in that decision making, maybe as a young teen, we could maybe readdress the situation. But at the moment, we haven't done so. But I know lots of parents that have been able to get more information, and it's worked out well for them, sometimes not so well. So yeah, kind of fence it in a little bit. Sorry on that one.
Yeah, and these decisions aren't straightforward, simple.
Yeah.
You've got to think through, and yeah, there are implications to doing these
Yeah.
different avenues. But yeah, this is where we try and kind of open up that space within
Yeah.
Paths to Parenthood
I was
to
gonna say that.
explore and
Yeah.
speak with others and kind of learn from others. So yeah, we've got an information around DNA testing, how you do that, and then also things to consider from that emotional perspective as well. I'm going to pick two more really quick questions, and then we just want to share a little bit more and signpost you to some further support. Quickly, both of you, did you have any negative feelings towards your parents for using a donor?
No.
Freya?
No.
Hayley?
No, I thought it was a brave choice, and I've always been quite proud of them for doing that. So yeah.
The only, like I said, the only thing for me was the late disclosure, which obviously I've kind of touched on and discussed, but no, not actually the fact. Like I say, I've never had a problem being donor conceived. I had a problem not being told I was donor conceived, really.
And finally, are there any resources or books for adults or children you would suggest? It'd be great just to get your kind of thoughts around the best books that you've found, both for yourself, but also for your children as well. Freya, what sort of books have you started to explore?
So many, but the one actually at the moment that we're using is the Making a Baby book, because it's so diverse. It covers
What makes a baby? Is that?
No, that
Oh, is
is
it
also
different?
a good one, but it's a different one. It's like a rainbow cover, and it's called Making a Baby. And it's we've kind of choose which bits we read at the moment, because some of it's not age appropriate, but it covers everything, and it like surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, IVF, IUI. It's all different families, single parents. I love it. It's a great book. So that's my go-to at the moment.
Yeah, they are helpful because they almost give you that bit of a script as well, don't they, to be able to share. And Hayley, what about yourself?
Yeah, so we've got loads of different books, and I think What Makes a Baby's always been a firm favourite with our kids. Kids refer to the sperm worm and the sunshine egg. There's always going to be that, I think, from now on. And they've loved reading that book. But we've got lots of personalised books, and I'd say that the best, we've got a whole resource library, haven't we, on the hub? We've done quite a bit of work. We've got dozens and dozens of titles, all separated out into different family types and different categories and things like that. So yeah, we've obviously got that resource on the hub if anyone's a member. So
yeah. And speaking of the hub, I think we're just going to share just and signpost you to all of the other information you've got available. I mean, I'm sure you've got so much just from this last hour of hearing Hayley and Freya. And I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for sharing your stories and being so open, because again, it's that really helps us to learn. And within Paths to Parenthood, we have spent a lot of time building content and speaking to other people. And like I say, donor conceived voices are really, really important. And within that, we have people who have been conceived through egg donation. We've people from different types of families as well. So I don't know whether the slide's working, Hayley, need to bring up.
Hopefully you can see that.
So just to share a little bit about Paths to Parent Hub, just if you've not heard of Paths to Parent Hub, we host, well, every month we're hosting webinars on different topics. So this month was all about communicating with partners. We've covered genetic loss so far this year as well. We're also going to be covering talking to your child next month. We've got a theme for every month of the year this year. We've also got a whole back catalogue of all of the webinars we've done before with psychologists. As you'll see here, we've got things such as preparing and protecting yourself through pregnancy and beyond. We've got stories with males as well, and lots of donor conceived voices as well. We've also talked about parenting after anonymous donation. There's over 80 hours now, I think, of different content for you to look at and take in. We also cover off all of the common fears that you might have. So there's a really easy way of kind of navigating the resources. And I know a lot of the questions that came out tonight will be reflected in there as well. We've also got a whole section for LGBTQ plus families as well. So in terms of donor conceived voices, I'm going to hand over to you, Hayley, because you're the expert here to share what we've got available.
Yeah. So like I say, I think obviously thank you to Freya for joining me tonight. Obviously you've heard our sort of lived experience, but we also, feel very passionate. I know I'll probably speak for Freya here too, just that there are other voices out there, not just ours. And these are just a very few examples that we've got on the hub, where we've done live chats with lots of different donor conceived people from lots of different walks of life, whether they're born through sperm donation or egg donation, LGBTQ families or heterosexual families. Like I say, these are just a few examples of some of the chats that we've got on the hub. And as Becky said, every month we're adding to the resource library. This month, going into March now, we're going to be speaking with a family, one lady that was born through embryo donation, her brother that was born through double donation, and her mum. So we're actually doing a chat with all three of them as part of our Talking to Our Children series for March. So.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm just sending a response to a couple of questions. Yeah. So just somebody is really keen for us to answer the question around anonymity. If your donor had been anonymous, would you have been angry at your parents for choosing anonymous and not being able to find out anything about your donor? Just wondered your thoughts on that, because I know there are some very strong feelings out there around anonymity, and I think we're really starting to learn more about the implications of anonymity. But what were your thoughts around that, Hayley?
I think, to be honest, like I say, if I get asked this quite a lot. I would always say to people, if you've got the choice to choose a donor that is open ID, or even if you're deciding to use a known donor, it would may be helpful, just because if your child is curious, it gives you the opportunity to have the identity of that donor. But I think even if you have used an anonymous donor, or you're in a situation that you maybe in your country of origin that you can only use anonymous donors, or for accessibility reasons you maybe have to go abroad, there are things that you can do to support your child and your family. But like I say, if people come to me with that question, I think if the option is there, then it's going to keep the door open, for example, if your child is curious, and that would probably be my best advice there.
Yeah, and I've obviously shared my own reflections around, we have used a fully anonymous donor, and I share those reflections because if people do have that choice, it's not something I'd really considered or really understood what that might mean. So yeah, but I don't believe that our children are automatically going to be negatively affected by that. I think there's so much that we can do as parents to support them. And I think the biggest thing is just being understanding of their perspectives and just being open and there to support them really at the end of the day. I just want to say a huge thank you again to Apricity. As I mentioned earlier, we do partner as Paths to Parenthood with Apricity. So if you do have your treatment through Apricity, you will get access to Paths to Parenthood and all of the resources that are there available. There is also a private app that we have where you can connect with other people who are on the journey, and we have monthly support groups as well that you can attend virtually. But also just finally, just say a massive thank you again to Freya and to Hayley. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I know we probably could have gone on all night talking about this topic, so apologies if we didn't get to your question, but do follow Freya Unicorn DCP on Instagram and Hayley DCP Journey to RP as well, and that's where you'll get lots and lots of more insights. And thank you to Debs for sharing more about what you do at Apricity. But I'll leave it there and let everyone get on with their evening, and thank you so much for taking the time to join.